Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Just as a brief introduction, my name's Dan. I work on the London and the New York team at Just Search. I've been here about 3.5 years now. And yeah, we thought it would be a great idea to bring everyone together and kind of talk about what has been a really tricky and strange year for everyone. And kind of talk about some of the things that came up in the salary survey and make, as I said before, make this as interactive as possible. If you've got any questions or anything you're not sure on, we want this to be a really good discussion. So as we go, if anything comes up, feel free to put in the Q&A. You can make it anonymous, or you can leave your name in. And yeah, Savannah, if you want anything to add to that.
Yeah, hi. Most of you know me, I think. Obviously, I'm Savannah. I'm a founder of Just Search, and coming towards the end of an absolutely unbelievable year. So much has changed, lots to talk about, and yeah, just really excited to share some of our results with you all on the feedback we got, but also answer any questions that you might have, and go from there. So yeah, should we get cracking, Dan?
Let's start with, we've got a poll just to start with, because we want really the conversation to be directed about what people want to know about. So I think Katie's just going to run a quick poll that you should see pop up on the screen shortly. Technology. Fine, there we go. So yeah, what topic would you like us to focus on most during the session? I won't read through the different bullet points, but just give you 10-15 seconds to just click that, and then that will just give some idea of what people want to know about.
I want to know about all of them.
Yeah, okay. we can try and cover everything for sure. Okay, that's probably enough time now. Let's see the results. Drum roll, please. Great. So salary is obviously a big focus, which is understandable as well. Obviously, we understand most people are doing end of year reviews. So that's probably something that we will start with if you're happy to, Svan. So yeah, first and foremost, I think I'd be really interested to know your thoughts on just in terms of the increase or decrease of salaries over the last 12 months. What's your kind of general overview and kind of using the data that we found?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so challenging. We've you know, every company is in a totally different position. I mean, obviously we specialize in the alternative investment and private equity sector, and we had about 500 people take part in the survey. So we got quite a decent number of participants. So I feel like the data is pretty robust. And you know, there's some really positive trends that we noticed, which is that despite these unbelievably challenging economic times, you know, obviously our sector has sort of been okay, you know, in terms of how they've performed. And as such, we've noticed that most salaries have been increased across the board this year. But the amount's more modest than previous years. It's not, I haven't seen anyone offering really more than 5%. The majority is less than 5%. Apart from in reception roles where we have seen salary decreases this year, the average salary being offered or being earned by receptionists is less than last year. But interestingly, the scale has increased. So we've seen a smaller percentage of candidates earning more than last year, but the majority earning less. And I think, you know, I don't need to explain why. That's probably quite obvious. Most companies haven't really got a reception, you know, a really busy reception team at the moment, and they've scaled back the size and the roles. So yeah, so that's one thing we've seen. But generally, the positive thing is we've noticed an increase, which is great, which sort of shows us that, you know, businesses hopefully really value their support teams.
What do you think employees' views are on pay rises this year or going into next year? Is it something that they're expecting or kind of hesitant about just as a client?
No, I mean, I think if you look, I think it's page 6 or 7 in the survey, the majority of employees aren't expecting a pay rise at all. 60% weren't expecting one. Interestingly, 52% were planning on offering them. So, and where they are expecting one, they're all happy with anything, basically. But you know, sort of 5 to 10% is what they would hope for. But it's interesting because most companies aren't offering more than 5%.
Absolutely. What we find a lot, I think, is a lot of people, you know, in terms of their pay rises and their bonus is very subjective, because obviously we're looking at support roles and it is done on general performance. It's subjected by HR or their line manager. Do you think it's harder for people to show their work with everyone working remotely? Is it harder for people to put their hands up and say, oh, I deserve a pay rise this year? Or how do you think people are reacting to that?
It's a really good question. And I think if you spend some time talking to our candidate community, most people are just grateful to have a job right now. I think that's the sentiment across the majority of employees, and, employers, who are, in the fortunate position to be able to have people. So I think actually that's a really challenging conversation to have over Zoom, especially if you've never done that before. And I think, as I said, most people are just kind of in a position where they're just waiting and seeing, getting to the end of the year and seeing what happens. Some will, and I think a lot will hope that their employers will approach them about it. But it's just a more challenging thing to do over Zoom. But again, if you've outperformed and you've got a really great end of year review, there's absolutely no reason why people shouldn't ask for a pay rise, that if they've done a good job. So it's something that I think employers should still expect, just it's a bit harder to do over Zoom.
Great. So I'd be interested in knowing kind of your opinion on bonuses this year. I think actually in terms of our client base, a lot of firms have done really, really well this year. There's been obviously a lot of volatility in the market and people have taken off the back of that. But are bonuses going to be paid out this year? What are people's expectations around that?
Definitely, which was, again, really, it was a surprise for us. The expected bonuses being paid out vary very much depending on the role, and it ranges from who you ask. So the candidates that we surveyed, the employees, they were expecting a 20 to 30% bonus, which was quite interesting, but that's only the percentage of people that actually expected a bonus. Most employees aren't expecting one. So over 52% weren't expecting one. And the ones that were expecting between 20 to 30%. On the flip side of the clients surveyed, again, 52% were actually planning on offering bonuses. And it varies widely depending on the role. It's on page 12 of the survey, and it's anything between 10 to 14% for reception staff, and right up to sort of 20 to 30% for your executive business partner role. The average for executive assistants was 10 to 14% as well, and same for personal assistants, same for the majority of roles. The only highest we saw was actually the EBP level.
Great. Do you think bonuses will have a bigger impact in terms of retaining staff and than it would do usually in a normal year when maybe salaries were going up and they knew what they were getting? Do you think bonuses will have more weighting? I
think so. I mean, if you're in a job, I mean, again, from the people we speak to, I mean, obviously the scale of unemployment and the crisis right now is terrifying. So, we speak to people every day who are losing their jobs, but obviously we speak to people who are in jobs and still looking for a new one. So, a good candidate is a good candidate forever. A good candidate is a good candidate in a bad market, and so if you've got someone great and they are expecting a bonus and you haven't communicated that to them that they're not going to get one, they're not going to be happy. But if you do pay them one, then I think they're going to be really grateful, because again, everyone knows that this is a challenging time.
Great. I think let's move on to kind of the role of a PA, EA, anybody in the support role at the moment. That has changed dramatically as obviously execs aren't traveling and the role has had to adapt. So how do you see it changing going forward? Say, for example, if next year traveling doesn't go back to normal and execs aren't traveling maybe as much as they used to, how will the role of a PA or an EA change, do you think, next year?
Well, Dan, you've asked me lots of questions there. So which one shall I answer first? I think if we go back to it's all kind of linked, actually. We've noticed in terms of the roles and the salaries, we've noticed that the breadth of salary range for assistants has increased much higher. So the top performing assistants last year were earning around 60,000. We're now seeing that stretch to the 70,000. And I think that's a sign of how the role is changing and how the role is evolving. So the higher paying roles have definitely started to earn more actually during lockdown. We've seen they've been sort of the winners of COVID, if you like. And I think that's because the scope of their role has progressed, and therefore the salary offered needs to increase. That's for a certain percentage, a smaller percentage. Office managers are also earning a lot more this year because of they've had to deal with new office layouts and procedures and got them changing, and they set up the office beautifully and then it changes again. And they've been the ones that have been sort of responsible for leading the charge on the sort of the remote working. So we've seen them receiving pay rises and increases this year, and seeing their roles change as well. I think at all levels across all businesses, roles have changed, and companies are tapping into their pools to do different things. So one of our clients, their reception team have become more assistant focused, one supporting their HR department. We've seen assistants become hybrids. We've seen, office managers become infrastructure and organizational change specialists. So it's just, I think everything and anything is up for grabs at the moment. And in terms of right here, right now, the role is evolving. We are in the industrial revolution. It's totally changing again. What it will look like in 2 to 3 years from now, I think, is still being decided right now. But what's interesting is that we've seen the breadth of salary range increase so dramatically in such a short space of time.
It's not a short answer. You could have a whole webinar right on the future.
Yeah, and I think we'll definitely, I've got some more stuff that I'd like to share around that. And I think one of the, I don't know what, one of the questions that we had in advance, I think, was around if you're in a position to be offering a pay rise, should you, when the rest of the market probably isn't. And I think, again, it just depends on your stance as a company. If you can, then you should, but equally, I think we're seeing some clients only increasing their salaries for top performers who they really, really, really want to retain, and others are doing more modest increases across the board. So it just kind of depends on a company stance. But I think because of the way the role's changing, it just really presents an opportunity to focus on developing and nurturing staff. So your top performers with the potential, but equally where people have potential and they're not quite there yet, but you really like their attitude, you think they're a good cultural fit and they're trying really hard, a bigger focus could be spent on budget, could be spent on training and development.
Absolutely. You mentioned change. Probably one of the biggest changes to all of our lives this year has been working remotely, right? And I know that's been brought up a lot, just in general. But for people in the support role, how do you think that will change going forward? Is there some sort of hybrid model where assistants don't need to be in 5 days a week? Do you think that's something of the past? I know I'm asking a million questions again, but what's your thoughts on remote working for assistants?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been a really interesting one because, as you guys all know, who are on the call, our sector has been historically quite sort of flexible averse, should we say, and working from home has not been something that, no one really thought it would work. And I think obviously now every business has seen that it can work and there are real pluses to it. And that's across all roles, not just obviously support roles, but you've got execs who are used to traveling 3 weeks out of 4, now not having to do that and getting to spend more time with their family or being more in the country that they live in. And I think everyone's seen the value of that. So I don't think flexible working is going anywhere. I think I do hear really interesting things about what companies are planning on doing as part of their flexible working policies, and hoping that they'll sort of go back to a version of what it was before. And I just think that's going to be really, really, really hard to implement for any organization going forward. But you've got a lot of people who hate working from home. There's so many people who really, really, really don't enjoy working from home full time. So it's about how organizations can get the balance of hybrids. We're seeing a massive uptake in virtual assistants as a permanent solution. So whether that's for project by project support, whether that's for, float support, where you historically might have used, a 1 week cover, you just sort of have an ongoing retainer with a virtual assistant. European hiring, so for roles where you might be struggling to find someone in a different country or in Asia, you can use a virtual assistant. So we've seen a lot more virtual assistants coming to the fore, like permanent virtual assistants, because at the moment all assistants are virtual really, but people who are fully virtual and don't ever really have to come into the office. So I think that's going to be a big change. But assistants had to adapt really quickly because most of the time they were using They were used to having, a lot of FaceTime, either with their team around them or with their execs when they would come in. And I think for a lot of assistants, and not just assistants, but again, for all support roles, there was a sort of fear of being seen to not be working and making themselves available all the time. And I think that was a real challenge for people. And I think it still is, knowing where the boundaries are and not thinking that you have to be available 24/7. I think that's been a real challenge for remote working. And I guess teamwork, especially in our sector, assistants, we look for team players. We don't look for people who are who like to work independently, because the work is so collaborative. And I think for a lot of support roles, one of the real plus points of their jobs is the team around them. And so not necessarily seeing their team, I think, is having quite a bad impact on them. Excuse me.
With that said, how can businesses keep their staff thriving, in a remote environment?
Well, please tell me. I mean, it's really challenging. I mean, I think, at the start, we all had our adrenaline and we were all doing our Zoom quizzes and fancy dress Zooms and Zoom pub drinks and all that good stuff. And I think more and more as this has gone on, people are zoomed out. They don't necessarily want to do a full day of working and then jump onto Zoom as well. So we've seen some really creative stuff, but actually it's a really good one for the audience. If anyone's got some really cool ideas that they'd be willing to share on what you guys have been doing lately, because I think people are running out of ideas. We've seen a lot more focus on wellbeing. So things like, subscriptions to mindfulness, yoga, exercise, smaller groups rather than like trying to do company-wide ones. And obviously there's still the Zoom stuff going on for those who want to take part in it. But the big question has obviously been around Christmas. We've had lots of our clients saying, what are we going to do about Christmas? Are we going to have a party? And I think everyone really would like to have one where they can see people in person, but in reality, it just depends. And I think most companies are planning on some form of virtual or a smaller in-person, sort of minor get together rather than a massive party.
Great.
But it's really hard. It's really, really hard. I think full virtual engagement is a real challenge. And I think where you have a hybrid model, it's going to present a challenge going forward for businesses, because if you've got people working from home and people in the office, unless you have holograms of them in the office, I'm just not really sure how that's a good experience for everybody. So that would be really interesting to see going forward.
Brilliant. Well, moving on to a different part of our survey, two new roles in the survey this year were obviously the executive business partner and the chief of staff role, two roles that we've really seen a big emergence of. Why are these roles important in businesses?
Well, I mean, this has just been an absolutely ridiculous time for leaders, across all businesses, all industries. As I said, it's a complete change. It's a complete revolution and no one's got all the answers. It's such a big learning curve for all involved. And I think for leadership, knowing how to make the right decisions and having the sort of the brain space to be able to make those decisions clearly is a real challenge. So I think an executive business partner and a chief of staff role is a more strategic role. They take away all of that noise and they help the execs deliver on their business goals. So they're very business orientated roles. And I think in a time like this, where every business is going through such a change and, looking at their spending, looking at their long-term plans, looking at their infrastructure, they need someone who can think like that. And it's just never been more challenging for leadership. So I think anyone that can take away more high-level decision-making from them is being more valued. We've seen them doing all sorts. But I always think of Obama. He had a really great quote where he talks about, when he was, obviously his new book's out, so you can read it for yourself. But he talks about when he was in the White House, he just didn't want to think about anything, what he ate, what time his meetings were, what tie he wore, his shoes, everything. He didn't think about any of it. All of it was completely taken away from him so that he could, make all the really big, important decisions that he needed to make. And I think, a good executive assistant at any level does that. But when you get to the sort of EBP, chief of staff level, they can take it one step further.
Great. I need to buy that book. That's reminding me.
Yeah. You know, Amazon will deliver it in a minute. I know I shouldn't say that, but they will.
Brilliant. I'd be interested to know what kind of skills do you think qualify someone for a role like that? Because it is a big step up. But what do you think kind of people should be looking for in terms of making the transition to a chief of staff role or an executive business partner?
I mean, I think ultimately my message has remained consistent throughout the whole year to anyone I speak to, whether they're employed or out of work. Your job right now is to upskill yourself at any level, because it's changing all over the place. So, you know, people need to be aware of terms that, I mean, who had heard of furlough before? You know, who had heard of, you know, lockdown, and God only knows what else they've been chucking at us. And so there's so many things that are happening, and any role is changing, and everyone's having to take on things that they hadn't had to do before. So upskilling yourself is absolutely essential, and that's across all levels. And I think if you're talking specifically about how could executive assistants get up to an EVP or chief of staff level, that's down to the employers, that's down to you guys to really be thinking about your career progression, your career development, your learning and development plans for your support teams. You know, really smart companies that we work with are viewing their support function as an unexplored sort of internal talent pool, where they can look inside and think, actually, does this person have X, Y, Z? Yes. Are they a good cultural fit? Yes. Could they learn Salesforce implementation? Could they learn, you know, about digital change? Could they learn about, you know, a specific product and rolling out Teams, for example? Could they become the Teams expert and roll that out across the business? And actually, the answer is quite often yes. So we're seeing a lot of people tapping into their internal pool to be able to develop those people. And, you know, you'll see from the survey, and we asked you that question, most people, it's kind of a work in progress. Historically, the roles have been quite traditional. There hasn't been the scope for them to develop. And that's still the case for the majority of them. It's not formal, it's not in place. And I think across all roles, and especially in support, employers, in order to be able to attract and retain top talent, need to be thinking about their career development plans and their PDPs for absolutely all roles. And, you know, tech skills are essential. I mean, so many people just don't have the required technical skills just to survive in this world. I mean, in a normal world, you might be able to just quickly ask a colleague, oh, do you know how I do this on Excel? But, you know, you don't have that now. You're at home, so you need to be able to do it independently. So upskilling yourself on MS, you know, on the whole MS suite, Office 365, G Suite if you use G Suite, and then obviously you need to make sure that you're an expert on all of your IT programs. And that's something that I think executive assistants and business support functions absolutely need to know, because if they understand what the program does and they understand the business demands and what the business actually needs, they can then make sure that the products are doing what the business needs them to do. And quite a lot of the people in your senior leadership roles aren't that tech savvy, and actually assistants have got an opportunity, you know, if we just focus on assistants, for example, to really become the tech savvy people in the firm who can be the sort of middlemen between IT and, you know, the front office, and interpret this sort of really complex language to people that don't understand it, and make sure that they're, you know, having marginal gains on their IT programs and maximizing the value, because they're really expensive, these programs, like making sure that you're using them in the right place across your business.
You mentioned tech savvy. I think that's probably qualities of anybody looking for a new job or in the job market at the moment is something they're probably going to be asked quite a lot. Do you think the interview process will be influenced by having to be tech savvy, and do you think testing will be involved at all?
Well, I mean, we certainly internally here, we're looking at how we can, when we already do very sort of, you know, quite a few tests, but we're looking at how we can roll out even more tests to make them really, really valuable for our clients. Because, you know, now at least you can start, you know, we've got a lot of people who are hiring, who are actually seeing someone face to face still before hiring them. But in quite a lot of situations, they're not getting to meet them at all in person before they hire them. So that extra level of comfort and security is quite well received. And I think if you think about the nature of private equity, it's, you know, they like to take their time in making decisions, and across all the sector, they want to have all the data. And I think, you know, as much data as possibly available to support perhaps the intuition part of the interview might help in selecting the right person. So I do think we will see more and more testing at interviews, yes.
Great.
As long as it doesn't increase bias, then we're all good, right?
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, another big part of our sorry, the lights have gone off in the office, but I will continue. Another big part of the survey was about maternity cover, right, and maternity pay. So if you could just give us a bit of a general overview in terms of the statistics that we found and from the survey that we put out there, what were your thoughts on that?
Sorry, Dan, you actually just, I don't know if it's my line or your line, but you just broke up quickly.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah, sorry.
Great. It was around maternity pay and maternity leave. I didn't know if you want to just give a bit of an overview on what's happened this year and what expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of hasn't really changed. I think the biggest change is that people are less afraid. I think they're still afraid to ask the family question around, you know, what their plans are if they do want to take some time out to raise a family. And I think that's something that should be changed as part of an interview process. But you know, everyone's seen the value of spending more time with their families. So I think we've had quite a lot of companies reviewing their policy. We've had some companies that have upped their paternity policy and viewed it as a really good time to actually change that, so that that's increased and more in line with the maternity policies. But it's 8 to 12 weeks is the average. That's the majority of what's paid, and that hasn't changed at all. Yeah.
Huge percentage of people that don't know why.
Huge. I think it's because it's just not really, it's not something that people, unless they're thinking about doing, you know, having a family at that time, it's not something that they're bringing up in the interview process. It's something that perhaps if they do ask the question, they think, oh, they're going to think I'm, you know, not going to be around and it might stop me from getting the job. I think that's quite an old-fashioned view, and I think slowly that will change anyway. I think companies are becoming more family friendly, you know, and just obviously, as we've seen over the course of the last year, more and more flexible working has increased, and that's only going to be to the benefit of companies offering a family-friendly environment.
Great. What can companies do to be a bit more transparent about what their policy is? And
well, I think it's down to you know, for example, your recruitment teams working closely with your recruiters and just making sure that that's being talked about as part of the benefit package and that it's not being forgotten about. You know, we all talk about sort of what the standard benefits are, and we kind of often forget to ask. So it's just making sure that we don't forget to ask, and that it's always included in the benefits talked about. And I think just more and more people now are going to be unafraid to say, I want flexible working as part of my, you know, if I'm interviewing for a job, these are the days I want to work from home, or these are the days that I'd like to leave early or whatever. I think people are going to be less afraid to do that now because it's kind of there and it's been happening consistently for the last 8 months.
Definitely.
We've had quite a few questions, Dan. Do you want to go through?
I was going to. I think we. So most recently, are companies who are promoting their EAs to executive business partner roles expecting them to do EA duties too, i.e. become an expansion of the EA role, or are they employing EAs and EVPs to work concurrently?
At the very highest level, we're seeing the two roles being hired independently of each other, but that's very rare. Largely what we're seeing is they're being promoted, and yes, they are expected to do the traditional EA part of the role, and they grow into the role because normally it's something that you're offering someone who's worked for you for a while, and you're promoting them as part of their development. So there's an understanding that they need to continue to take on and manage the traditional part of the role. And if that was to become unmanageable, that's when it's being reviewed. And then perhaps bringing in a more junior assistant into the group to support and take away the more admin focused tasks.
Great. Another question we had, which actually we're going to move on to now, is what benefits are employees most interested in? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely currently sort of, I think Phoebe actually mentioned this, sort of well-being and exercise and gym and sort of holidays and flexible working, the obvious ones. So those are the ones that people are most interested in. You know, on page 14 of the survey, we talk about holiday days being offered, and 51% offer 25 days or more. If you're offering any less than that in the UK, it's just not competitive. And I think that still remains a really big one for, even though at the moment you might not be able to go anywhere, it is still really, really important. But equally well-being, what are you doing about staff culture, empowering people, helping people get through this period. And there's been some really great examples of companies absolutely, outperforming and I think doing incredible things for their employees during this pandemic. Like I said, anything from headspace subscriptions, yoga, lunches, just so many examples of things that people are doing to look after the well-being. And I think mental health has become such a big, anyone who sort of knows Joss Search will know that we've run webinars on mental health before, we've run events. It's a big thing for us. And I think over the course of the last year, we've obviously seen the impact of it across everywhere, and I think people are very interested in knowing, what your employee assistance program is. Companies are offering access to counsellors, and stuff like that, because it is a really challenging time for so many levels. We've all been conditioned to fear and living in fear for the last 8 months, and that has an impact on anyone, no matter who you are. So I think we're seeing a lot of interest in that, and actually employers are stepping up and doing that.
Great. A lot of companies obviously offer kind of travel card loans, which hasn't been needed over the last few months, obviously. Are there any benefits that you think should be promoted or kind of swapped in for that if it's going to be something ongoing, people are working more remotely?
Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of companies at the start of the pandemic gave a lump sum to actually sort of get yourself set up from home with a certain chair or a certain desk or what have you. So I think that will become part of, I imagine, a traditional benefits package, will be like your working from home comfort package or whatever you want to call it, because there's a real health and safety liability, and I think making sure that they're set up correctly and able to work, and their setup is a big one. So I think that's something that's 100% probably going to be brought in more formally, and given a bit more attention. And obviously flexible working, everyone's reviewing their flexible working policy. In the survey, most people hadn't sort of decided what their final flexible working policy will be, but it's definitely high on the agenda of like being reviewed for the future.
Back in March, do you think people were ready for flexible working? Do you think they were already set up, or what was your thinking?
I think everyone surprised themselves by how quickly they were able to take their business, in completely digitally and away from the physical location. I don't think any businesses really that we speak to in our sector struggled with that. I think it was more around the collaboration and relying, and that's still, I think, a big struggle for business, is the collaboration. It's still not there. The adoption of programs like Teams is brilliant. Teams is absolutely a phenomenal platform for that, but it's still being learned by all of us. So I think collaboration and creativity, I think, is a big thing that people are missing, and people have, I think, started to lose, is that ability, because you bounce ideas from people about, sort of the more creative parts of your business. And I think that's something that we're perhaps in danger of losing unless we sort of start having some kind of physical collaboration with your colleagues, because there's only so many Zooms, when you're on your own at home, you only know what and that's the same with us generally in life, and cognitive diversity is so essential to being successful. And I think that's a huge one that was a big struggle and remains a big struggle, I think.
Absolutely. We've got a question here saying, did you say that only 15% of companies are offering less than 25 days holiday per year?
Hold on. What I said was over 50% are offering more than 25, but let me just jump quickly to the holidays. So 3% offer 24 days, 4% offer 23 days, 3% offer 22 days, 1% offer 21, and 10% offer 20 days. So you've got basically 20% of our survey offering less than 25, and the rest offering more than 25. I hope that clarifies that.
Great. Obviously, feel free to keep posting questions if you have any, or anything comes up during. So now, one of the things that we were talking about briefly before we started was the idea of London waiting, right, in terms of salaries, and that is something that's definitely come up more recently, as a lot of roles are nearly going to be remote for maybe the whole of next year. So,
I hope not.
Yeah, I know. What is your thought on London waiting? Should that still be included, or what? God,
I've got two hats here, right? So obviously I have business owner hat, where, businesses are in the pursuit of profit, and your immediate thinking is, a business could save some money by, if people aren't working in London, should we be paying them a London salary? Because typically people, someone in Newcastle isn't any less qualified to do the job as someone in London. So it's not about the qualifications, it's about the job. And typically people have been paid more to work in London because London's more of an expensive place to live. London is still an expensive place to live. And if you are expecting people to still come into your office and your office is in London, then I don't think, and whether they're expected to come in one day a week or one day a month, I don't think you can change that. But you certainly will see it. There will be organizations, I think, we already know the companies that have outsourced all their customer services to India because it's considerably cheaper. If you have that happening across all country, across all roles, where you can get access to really top talent in different countries, not just in the UK, but in different countries, employers will consider that because, again, a business is at the moment, capitalism is all about making profit. And if there's a profit to be made, then businesses will review it. Whether they go for it or not, I don't know. I don't see our sector doing it because I think that there's just no need, but you just never know. So I think it's a real struggle. It's a real challenge. We get asked it all the time. Loads of companies are saying, oh, well, we're going to offer you 10% less because you're not living in London and we don't expect you to come to the office. So we are seeing it happening, and it's going to happen more and more. And I think ultimately, if you're not living in London and you're living somewhere else and that suits you, then that's a decision you make as an individual. And as an employer, I guess you just decide what you think the job is worth to the business and what the cost is, and whether it's in London or in Newcastle, that salary I think is fair and should be paid. I know Facebook do it. Facebook offer you different salaries depending on where you're located, and they're not changing that at all. So, and I think they intend to reduce people's salaries if they move out of a primary city.
Got you. So unemployment has gone up quite considerably this year. What effect or what changes have you seen to the recruitment process in general?
Well, obviously, everything's being done virtually now. Everyone's interviewing through Zoom, which I think, had you have asked us all a year ago whether we'd be doing that, the answer probably would have been no. So I think obviously huge amounts of recruitment is being done on online videoing, which I think actually in some respects works really, really well. I think because you can incorporate it into people's diaries much easier. If they're traveling, if they're in a different country, different time zone, it's much easier to slot them in, and people can be more flexible around interviewing and the timing. So we've seen, whereas before we'd have really short slots of times to be able to offer people, for an interview, that's definitely changed. But I think as a lot of companies, especially our sector is quite traditional, still want to meet people in person. So we're seeing the final round being done in person, socially distanced, of course. We're still seeing that, not across the board. And obviously when there was a full lockdowns on both occasions, that wasn't happening at all. And they were still being hired. So yeah, I think that's been a big change, is kind of having to hire people over Zoom, and not in person, in a quite sort of traditional sector and quite conservative sector.
This is quite a broad question, but in your opinion, what do you think is the best thing to come out of lockdown in terms of recruitment in general? What's been good that's come out of that?
Recruitment in general. Well, I think in a weird way, I don't know. I think it's sort of, there's a good opportunity to build relationships with people you might have your eye on, so you don't have to hire them straight away. So I think for us, over lockdown, we didn't furlough anybody, and we just carried on building relationships with candidates who weren't actively looking, and just sort of nurturing those relationships and having your sort of pipeline, your potential candidate pipeline. And I think that's something that a lot of companies have been doing. It's like, we're not quite ready to hire and the person's not quite ready to leave, but they're having conversations. So I think that's been a big plus point. And yeah, like I think the flexibility to be able to interview is also really beneficial.
Great. we've covered a lot. We have gone through a lot of questions,
Yeah.
and I think we've covered each sector. I don't know if there's anything in particular that you wanted to shed more light on, or any statistics that you wanted to emphasize in the salary.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of what would be really interesting is just to talk about the role, you know, the number of people are supporting in an assistant role. So I think you know, what we saw is the majority are supporting 2 to 3, and that's still very much the case. And one of the questions we had was around whether we see that changing, you know, in the future, and you know, what that might look like, you know, in terms of their salary and the role responsibilities. And I think, you know, the majority of people, majority of assistants will always be supporting, I think, 2 to 3. A one-to-one role just doesn't really exist until you get to the EVP, chief of staff level. And I think you'll start seeing more hybrid assistants, and I think the roles are going to become more valuable. I think over time, this is just my view, over time I think we'll have less of the lower skilled, lower qualified roles, and more really high performing, high level strategic roles that are paid much more. If we look at just the roles we've been recruiting this year, the average salary for the role we've been placing has been 45k, whereas in the previous year it was 40. So we've noticed you know, already this year, an average of 5k increase on the salary, which suggests that you are just everyone's hiring a higher level, a more experienced candidate. And it makes sense. If you're going into an unknown environment, you want someone who knows what they're doing. Because if you're chucking them in the deep end at home, you're not, you know, taking on a junior who you need to train. It's going to be really hard. And I think that's the big danger of the hybrid world, the fully flexible, the fully remote world, is what happens to the trainees, you know, across all levels. What happens to, you know, if we talk about support, what happens to team assistants? If you're talking about the investment professionals, what happens to your analysts coming through, you know, from university? Because I think you know, the law society did a review on their trainee solicitors, and 75% of their learning is done on the job. So if they are remote, if all these people are remote, what's going to happen? And do these companies have proper support programs and proper virtual training offerings that can get people up to speed just as quickly as they would if they were in the office and learning from just overhearing those conversations? And so I think that's a big thing for the whole industry. And I think, you know, that's where at the moment the value is definitely on experienced people, which is why we're seeing such mass unemployment in the, you know, the graduate world. There's obviously you've got the Rishi Sunak announced another Kickstarter program. It's so challenging for anyone without experience to get a job right now, because a company doesn't know how to onboard them. You know, if they don't know what they're doing and they haven't worked before, it's a real challenge. I'm not saying that some companies aren't hiring graduates, of course they are, but it's just much less.
Is there anything you could suggest companies doing in that first week to 4 weeks to integrate people remotely? If you're starting your new job from your living room, what can a company do to make that integration a bit better?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to, a lot of companies have already probably done it over the last 8 months. The first thing I would do would be to conduct a survey on anyone that you've hired on board virtually over the last 8 months and ask them about their induction. What could have been done better? How could we improve? And that's the first step. And then obviously take your answers and review it. But it's a perfect opportunity to actually review your entire onboarding program. You know, what do we do? How embedded do we get people in the culture? And how much do we teach them about the values? How much do they actually understand about the business itself? You know, so that's a huge thing, I think, for support, is a lack of understanding and curiosity about what the company actually does. And I think that's something that 100% needs to change and be encouraged by employers. They need to understand the business demands and the business priorities, because if they understand those things, they'll be able to make better decisions about which IT program will be the right, you know, option for them, or what meeting to prioritize for their boss. And I think it's an undervalued piece of the induction, and I think it's never been more important that people actually understand what the company does, and then obviously being embedded into the team so that they've got people to go to for questions.
Great. We have a question in the Q&A from Isabel. Hi, Isabel. So exec business partners, what kinds of duties are they performing in addition to their EA responsibilities?
Yeah, so what we're seeing in that is a lot of strategic work, managerial responsibility, so line management, so perhaps line management of their department, of the other support people in their department, line management of a budget for that department, strategic planning for their executives, attending meetings on their behalf. You know, we've seen, one of our clients who hired a chief of staff to work alongside, so not the partner, just a high performing deal doer, hired a chief of staff to work alongside him. And that person, you know, drafts proposals, attends meetings, and operates more at a strategic level, basically. So taking on some of the, you know, research on potential acquisitions, or working in partnership with HR or the leadership function on, you know, cross-company cultural improvements, for example, or anything sort of around infrastructure change. Because I think if you think about what leadership are having to go through right now, you know, it's such a big learning. There's so many things for them to learn. Most of them, you know, quite a lot of managers, especially in PE and the alternative investment sector, become managers because they're really good at their job. They're not necessarily really great managers. You then chuck them into a virtual setting where they don't get to see their team. You know, a really high performing executive business partner will act as, you know, a second in command of the team, and will really help ensure that the exec knows what's going on in the team. So they take on a lot more of the people element, especially if that person is a really business orientated person. So it just depends on the nature of the individual they're supporting as well, whether they're more business or people orientated. But whichever one they're not, the EVP sort of steps in.
Great. I just had one last question to you on salaries. Do you think salaries in the next 3 to 5 years will continue to go up and rise, and why is that, if so?
I think not all support roles will continue to go up and rise. I think, as I said, the absolute must for anyone in any job is upskilling. And I think across your support teams, that's one thing you really want to be doing for your team, is making sure that they're getting access to training and being upskilled. And I think that as people become more qualified, and I keep sort of calling it a hybrid assistance. I mean, it's not that I invented the term or anything, but that's just what makes sense to me. Or like superpowers, you know. I think if you have, you know, if you've got like a superpower, or if you've got a specific skill, like a superpower, let's say, and let's say your superpower is Salesforce, right? You're just an absolute genius at it, and you get really, really, really under the skin of Salesforce, and you become like the Salesforce go-to for your organization, so much so that you can actually write code, you can run reports, you can speak to the Salesforce team to make sure that it's actually doing what the sales team need it to do. I mean, one of our clients, EQT, they created this absolutely unbelievable thing called the motherboard, which is just this, you know, a really amazing like deal pipeline thing for their investors that they can see. And if you became like the expert on that, your salary, you know, your worth to the business is exponential. So I think those are the roles that we will see their salaries continuing to increase, where people are offering even more value to the business. I think if the roles remain very traditional across all levels, then I think we won't see those roles increasing in value, but we will see more really high performing support functions, I think, going forward. Yeah, that's what I think it's going to, what's the word? Polarize, you know, we have one extreme and extreme on each end.
Brilliant. Look, I think we've covered a lot today, unless you've got anything else to mention. Yeah, I think that was really a good discussion, to be honest. And I think we covered most things in terms of the salaries, the bonuses, maternity pay. Obviously, this conversation could be continued for another hour or so quite easily, especially around London waiting, as we mentioned, and will that be a thing in the future? But I don't know if you had any final thoughts to finish off, or
no, I mean, I think everyone's just, I think everyone here, you know, like obviously we work really closely with our clients and our candidates, and I think everyone's done a really good job at trying to adapt. And I think one of the big plus points, I think, for the sector is around flexible working, and I think you know, that will help with cognitive diversity and diversity and inclusion in general. You know, you're going to see more and more options and availability to hire people that you probably might not have been able to hire before, and you've got more higher access to them. So I think that's really a really good, a great thing to come out of this. And I think the role's changing, and I think companies are aware of that, and that's really exciting as well. So no, I think we've got a lot of data. This is only the salary survey was only a really small chunk of the data we collected, and we're intending on doing more of these around, for example, flexible working, and in more detail around the future of the assistant role and what we think it will look like. Things like that. We'll be doing more of these over the course of the next few months, because it's just changing all the time. And I noticed, John, one of the things you've put in there is around having these as a more, an open thing where people can bounce off each other. Absolutely. I mean, I happy to organise those separately. I did a few of those right at the beginning of lockdown, but I think ultimately, this is sort of quite a conservative industry by nature. So people have got to be feeling very open and feeling like they want to share. But other than that, it happens on a small scale anyway. Just, it's just harder to do over Zoom. But yeah, thanks very much for attending, everybody.
Definitely. And I don't know if Katie had a poll to finish. I don't know if last things to finish with. Hopefully that will magically appear on the screen now. Just to finish. There we go. So we're currently, as it says, we're currently planning our next piece of content, our next lunch and learn. What would you like to hear about? And let us know.
Should be enough time.
Yeah, and happy for you to.
And Katie, I'm sure she's going to be sharing if you haven't already, just the salary survey, the full salary survey, which you can share on. Oh, great.
Great, brilliant.
DNI 50%.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's brilliant for us to know. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. As I said, there's probably plenty more that we could say on this topic, but yeah, really, really appreciate your questions and your input. And yeah, we hope to speak to you all soon.
Yeah, if you've got any questions separately to this, you know where to get in touch with us. Yeah, happy Friday. Stay warm. I'm so cold. I'm going to stand by the radiator for a bit and warm up. But happy Friday, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.